The Arizona Territory Courthouse smelled of sweat, dust, and desperation. Margaret Hartley stood before Judge Caldwell's bench, her hands folded in front of her travel-stained gray dress, her spine straight, despite 3 days without proper sleep. Outside, the sun beat down on Tucson's plaza, where a crowd had gathered to witness what the judge called justice, and what Margaret recognized as cruelty wrapped in legal paper. "Miss Hartley," Judge Caldwell said, shuffling documents on his desk. He was a heavy man with mutton-chop whiskers and eyes that had seen too much frontier violence to retain much compassion. "Your brother's debts have been settled by the territorial government. However, there remains the matter of the ranch. You cannot run it alone. An unmarried woman has no legal standing to hold the deed." Margaret's jaw tightened. Her brother Thomas had died of fever 6 weeks ago, leaving her with a struggling cattle ranch, 200 head of cattle, and debts to half of Tucson. The bank had offered to buy the land for a fraction of its value. The judge had another solution. "The law requires you to marry within 30 days, or the property reverts to the territory for auction," Caldwell continued. "Given your circumstances, I've arranged for suitable candidates." He gestured to the window. In the plaza below, a dozen men stood in a ragged line. Cowboys, drifters, prospectors. Men who'd agreed to marry a stranger for land and a roof. Margaret's stomach turned. "You may choose any man from that group," the judge said. "The ceremony will be performed today. You'll have your legal husband, keep your ranch, and these men will have honest work. Everyone benefits." Margaret looked at the line of men. Sunburned faces, desperate eyes, hands that had known too much whiskey and too little soap. One leered openly. Another spat tobacco juice into the dust. A third looked barely 18, terrified. Then her eyes caught on a different group. 6 men shackled together near the jail, awaiting transport to the reservation. Apache prisoners, captured after a skirmish near the border. They sat in the shade, dignified despite their chains, faces impassive in the face of gawking townspeople. One man stood out. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with long black hair tied back, high cheekbones, and eyes like obsidian that missed nothing. Even in chains, his posture radiated quiet strength. The fresh cut marked his temple, but he held his head high. When a townsman threw a stone, he didn't flinch, just caught the man's eye with a look so steady, so devoid of fear, that the townsman backed away. Something in Margaret's chest shifted. "Before we continue this journey, I'd love to ask you a small favor. If you're enjoying this story of courage and unexpected love, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It truly means the world to us and helps us bring you more quality content like this. Your support makes these stories possible. Thank you." "Judge Caldwell," Margaret said quietly, "you said I could choose any man?" "Any man in the line, yes. You didn't specify which line." The judge's eyebrows rose. "Miss Hartley." She pointed to the Apache warrior in chains. "That one. I choose that one." The courthouse erupted. The clerk dropped his pen. The deputy's hand went to his gun. Judge Caldwell's face turned the color of raw beef. "Absolutely not. That's a savage, a prisoner of war." "You said any man," Margaret replied, her voice steady, though her heart hammered. "You didn't specify race, religion, or legal status. The territorial law says I must marry to keep my land. You're offering me the choice of husband. I've made my choice." "The woman's lost her mind," someone shouted from the gallery. "She can't marry a hostile." But Margaret kept her eyes on the judge. She'd read law books during her brother's illness, preparing for this moment. Unless there's a specific statute prohibiting it, the marriage would be legal. "Is there, Your Honor?" Caldwell's mouth worked silently. There wasn't. The territorial laws were vague on interracial marriage, deliberately so, to give judges discretion. But Margaret had called his bluff publicly. If he refused now, she could appeal, claim discrimination, tie up the land in courts for years. The judge looked at the Apache warrior, then back at Margaret. "Do you understand what you're asking? This man doesn't speak English. He's a warrior, killed 3 soldiers in the skirmish that captured him. He'll be on the reservation within the week. Then marry us before he goes," Margaret said. "Unless the law doesn't actually give me a choice." A long, tense silence. Finally, Caldwell banged his gavel. "Fine. You want to throw your life away on a savage? That's your business. But don't come crying to this court when—" He stopped, mastered himself. "Bring the prisoner." The deputy unchained the Apache warrior from the group and shoved him forward. He moved with fluid grace despite 3 days in irons, his dark eyes assessing everything: the judge, the crowd, Margaret. When his gaze settled on her, she felt the weight of it, intense and questioning. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 28, with broad shoulders and scars that told stories of survival. His hands, though chained, were strong and capable. He smelled of dust, sweat, and something else. Sage, maybe, or cedar. "Does he have a name?" Margaret asked. "He won't say," the deputy muttered. "None of them do." Margaret stepped closer to the warrior, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I'm Margaret," she said slowly, clearly. "Margaret Hartley." The warrior studied her face. She saw intelligence there, and caution, and something that might have been curiosity. He said nothing. "I need a husband to keep my land," she continued, not knowing if he understood. "They'll send you to the reservation regardless. But if you marry me, at least you'll have legal protection. A name in the records. Maybe a better chance." Still nothing. But he didn't look away. Judge Caldwell cleared his throat. "Let's get this over with. Do you, Margaret Ann Hartley, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "And do you?" He looked at the warrior. "Brother's sake. Does anyone here speak Apache?" An old Mexican man in the back stood. "I speak some, senor. Ask him if he agrees to marry this woman." The old man spoke in a language of soft consonants and rhythmic tones. The warrior listened, his expression unchanging. Then he looked at Margaret again. Really looked, like he was seeing into her soul, weighing something she couldn't name. He spoke. 3 words in Apache, firm and clear. "He says yes," the translator said. "He says, I see you." It means yes, but also it means he understands what you offer. Margaret's breath caught. "Fine," Caldwell said, clearly disgusted. "By the power vested in me by the Arizona Territory, I pronounce you man and wife. God help you both. Next case." They stood on the courthouse steps, an impossible pair. Margaret in her gray dress, practical boots, blonde hair pinned in a severe bun. The warrior, her husband, in torn buckskin pants, bare-chested, hands still shackled, watching the crowd with wary eyes. "You'll need to come to the ranch," Margaret said, knowing he likely couldn't understand. "I'll speak to the marshal about releasing you into my custody. You're my husband now. That should mean something. The warrior's eyes moved to her face. He spoke again in Apache. "What did he say?" Margaret asked the old translator, who'd followed them out. "He asks why you chose him, of all the men." Margaret looked up at her husband. "Because he was the only one who looked like he'd rather die than lose his dignity. And I understand that feeling." The translator spoke. The warrior's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes. He said something else. He says his name is Dakota. It means friend to everyone in his tongue, though the white man has given him reason to be friend to no one. The old man paused. "He says you have courage, for a white woman. He will not harm you." "I didn't think he would," Margaret said quietly. It took 2 days, $50 in bribes, and a letter from a sympathetic army lieutenant before Marshal Davies agreed to release Dakota into Margaret's custody. The terms were strict. He was confined to her ranch, required to check in monthly, and would be sent to the reservation immediately if he caused any trouble. "You're making a mistake," Davies warned as he unlocked the shackles. "These Apache, they're not like us. Can't be tamed, can't be trusted." "Then it's my mistake to make," Margaret replied. When the irons fell away, Dakota rubbed his wrists, the skin raw and bleeding beneath. He looked at Margaret, then at the open door, then back at Margaret. For a moment, she thought he might run. The door was right there. He was free. He didn't run. Instead, he picked up the hat the deputy had thrown at him, a battered thing, too small, and followed Margaret out into the blinding Arizona sun. The ride to the ranch was silent. Margaret drove the wagon. Dakota sat beside her, his body tense, ready. She could feel him assessing everything: the distance to the mountains, the position of the sun, escape routes. She didn't blame him. "The ranch is small," she said, knowing he probably didn't understand but needing to fill the silence. 200 head of cattle, a house, a barn. My brother and I built it 5 years ago. He died of fever last month." Her voice cracked. "I've been running it alone since then, but the law says I can't, not as an unmarried woman." Dakota turned to look at her. His eyes were softer than she expected. "I don't expect you to be a real husband," she continued. "Just stay. Help me keep the land. In return, you'll have food, shelter, safety. Better than the reservation." He said something in Apache. "I wish I understood you," Margaret whispered. He placed his hand over his heart, then pointed at her, then at the land ahead. She didn't need a translator. The meaning was clear. Together. The ranch house was small but sturdy. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, a porch that faced the sunset. Dakota stopped at the threshold, looking at the doorway like it might be a trap. "It's all right," Margaret said. "This is home. Your home now." He stepped inside cautiously. She watched him take in the space, the simple furniture, the books on the shelf, the rifle above the fireplace, the closed door to her bedroom. His eyes lingered on the rifle. "You can use it if you need to," Margaret said, "for hunting, protection." She mimed shooting. "I trust you." Dakota's eyes snapped to hers. That word, trust, seemed to land differently. He moved to the fireplace, touched the stone with careful fingers, then looked back at her with a question in his eyes. "You'll sleep here," she said, gesturing to a pallet she'd prepared by the hearth. "I'll sleep in there." She pointed to her room. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." That night, Margaret lay in her bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in her house. She heard Dakota moving quietly, the soft pad of footsteps, the creak of floorboards. Once, she heard him at the window, and she knew he was looking out at the desert, at the mountains, at freedom. She held her breath, waiting for the sound of the door opening. It never came. In the morning, she found him gone. Her heart sank. Of course he'd run. Why wouldn't he? She was a stranger. This was a prison with prettier walls, and the desert called to him like... Then she smelled coffee. Dakota stood at the stove, somehow having figured out the coffee pot. 2 cups waiting. When she appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown and robe, he gestured to the cup, an offering. "You stayed," she breathed. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the relief in her voice. He nodded once, firm. Then he pointed outside. "Mimed riding a horse, working. You want to help with the ranch?" Another nod. Margaret felt something warm unfold in her chest. "All right then, let's teach each other." The days developed a rhythm. Margaret spoke English, slowly and clearly, pointing at objects. Horse, water, sky, cattle. Dakota repeated the words, his accent thick, but his memory sharp. In return, he taught her Apache. Shash, tu, ya, chij. Bear, water, sky, wood. They worked side by side. Dakota was a natural horseman, better than any cowboy she'd known. He could track cattle through terrain that looked untouched to her eyes, could predict weather by the behavior of birds, could gentle a skittish horse with patience and soft words in Apache. He fixed the fence line Margaret had been struggling with for weeks. He found a spring she didn't know existed. He sat for hours making arrows with Fletcher precision, then brought down a deer with a single shot that kept them in meat for 2 weeks. At night, they sat by the fire. She read aloud from her books. He seemed to like the sound of her voice, even if he understood little. He carved, his hands sure and steady, creating beautiful things from wood and bone. Once, he made her a comb, smooth and perfect, decorated with a pattern of flowers. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over it. "Thank you." He watched her face, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not desire, exactly. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that something was growing between them, tender and strange. 6 weeks into their marriage, trouble arrived in the form of James Killian and 5 of his ranch hands. Killian owned the neighboring spread, 3 times the size of Margaret's, and he'd been trying to buy her out since Thomas died. He rode up at noon, dust cloud announcing his arrival long before he reached the house. Margaret met him on the porch, rifle in hand. Dakota appeared from the barn, moving to stand beside her. His hand rested on the knife at his belt. "Margaret?" Killian said, tipping his hat with false courtesy. He was 40, handsome in a cruel way, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. "Heard you married yourself an Apache. Wanted to see if the rumors were true." "They are. This is my husband, Dakota. Now state your business or leave my land." Killian's smile widened. "Your land? That's funny. Way I hear it, you married a savage to keep from marrying a decent white man. That legal fiction might satisfy Judge Caldwell, but it don't satisfy me." "What satisfies you isn't my concern." "Should be." Killian dismounted, his men following. "See, I've got a deed here, says your water rights are in dispute. That spring your husband found belongs to my land. You've been using my water illegally. That's a lie. That's what the survey says." He pulled out a paper. "Territorial surveyor came through last week, drew new lines. That spring's on my side now." Margaret's blood ran cold. Without that spring, her cattle would die. She'd have to sell. "You're lying!" she said again. Show me the survey. Happy to. Soon as you agree to sell. $50 an acre. That's generous, considering you married a hostile. Dakota's hand tightened on his knife. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood threat. He said something in Apache, low and dangerous. What'd the savage say? Killian asked, hand dropping to his gun. He said, this is our land, and you're trespassing. Margaret raised the rifle. I suggest you leave before this gets ugly. Killian laughed. You gonna shoot me, Margaret? You and your Apache? My men will see you hang before sunset. Maybe, Margaret said, but you'll be dead, and that's got to count for something. The standoff stretched taut. Killian's men shifted uneasily. Dakota's posture was coiled, ready. Margaret's finger rested on the trigger, steady despite her racing heart. Then Dakota spoke, not in Apache, in broken, careful English. She is under my protection. You threaten her, you die. I die. She lives. That is enough. The words fell into silence, like stones in still water. Killian stared. The savage talks. My husband talks, Margaret corrected, her heart swelling. And he's right. Leave now, or text whether you're faster than both of us. Killian's eyes moved between them. Whatever he saw, the unified front, the quiet certainty, the willingness to defend what was theirs, made him step back. This ain't over, he said, remounting. That survey's legal. You got 2 weeks to clear out, or I'm bringing the marshal. They rode away in a cloud of dust and threats. When they disappeared, Margaret's legs gave out. She sat hard on the porch steps, the rifle clattering beside her. Dakota knelt in front of her, his hands hovering, not quite touching. You spoke English, she said, laughing and crying at once. You've been learning. Learning, he agreed. His pronunciation was rough, but the word was clear. For you. Oh, Dakota, she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, the first time they'd truly touched, skin to skin. No pretense of accident or necessity. His palm was warm, calloused, strong. What are we going to do? He lifted her hand to his chest, over his heart. Fight. Together. Together, she echoed. And sitting there on the porch, with their hands clasped, and trouble bearing down like a storm, Margaret realized she was no longer alone. More than that, she realized she was falling in love with her Apache husband. They spent 3 days riding the boundaries, verifying markers, checking old surveys. Margaret's deed was clear. The spring was on her land, exactly where it had always been. Killian's survey was a forgery, but proving it would require money for lawyers and time they didn't have. On the 4th night, sitting by the fire, Dakota spoke. Killian, he will not stop. The words came slowly, carefully. He wants land, wants power. Will use law, use lies, use... He made a gesture of shooting. I know, Margaret said, but I can't just give up. This ranch is all I have left of Thomas. It's my home. Our home, Dakota corrected. He met her eyes. You gave me home, family, name in white man's book. I give you protection, strength, whatever you need. Her throat tightened. You've already given me so much. Not enough. He shifted closer, his shoulder almost touching hers. In my tribe, when man marries, he makes vow. Protect wife, provide, honor her above all. I make this vow to you now, Margaret. You are my wife. I am your husband. Not paper marriage, real marriage. If you want. Margaret's heart hammered. Do you want that? Dakota reached for her face, his hand cupping her cheek with a gentleness that belied his warrior's strength. I see you, he said in Apache, then in English. I see your strength, your courage, your kindness. I see you, and he struggled for words. My heart knows you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I see you too, my brave, impossible husband. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His lips touched hers, soft and questioning. She answered by pressing closer, her hands coming up to his shoulders, feeling the solid warmth of him. The kiss deepened, tender but hungry. Months of careful distance, dissolving in firelight and need. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Dakota rested his forehead against hers. No more fear, he murmured. No more alone. Together, she agreed. That night, he didn't sleep by the fireplace. He slept beside her, holding her close, their hearts beating in rhythm as the desert wind whispered promises through the windows. Killian returned a week later with the marshal, the forged survey, and an eviction notice. But when they arrived, they found something unexpected. Dakota stood on the porch, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood 5 Apache warriors, his brothers, cousins, men from his tribe who'd heard of his marriage and come to see this white woman who'd chosen an Apache over her own kind. Behind them, Margaret stood with Mrs. Chen from Tucson, the old Mexican translator, and a half-dozen small ranchers who'd suffered under Killian's land grabs and were tired of running. And in Margaret's hand was a document, the original territorial survey, borrowed from the land office by a sympathetic clerk who'd had enough of Killian's corruption. Marshal Davies, Margaret said calmly, I believe you'll find Mr. Killian's survey is fraudulent. This is the original. The spring belongs to my land, always has. Mr. Killian has been using forged documents to steal property. The marshal looked at the document, then at Killian, then at the group of armed, determined people facing him. Well, he said slowly, appears there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Margaret said. A crime. Will you arrest him, or shall I file charges with the territorial governor? Killian's face was purple with rage. You can't prove. I can prove you tried to force me off my land. I can prove you forged documents. I can prove you've done the same to 3 other families. Margaret stepped forward, and I have witnesses who'll testify in federal court if necessary. The small ranchers nodded. The Apache warriors stood like stone, their presence a promise. Marshal Davies sighed. Mr. Killian, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Got some questions, need answering. This is because of that savage, Killian spat. You're taking her side because the law is the law, Davies interrupted, and forgery is forgery. Now come on. As they led Killian away, Margaret felt Dakota's hand find hers. She looked up at him, this warrior who'd become her husband, her partner, her love. We did it, she whispered. Together, he said, and kissed her forehead in front of everyone. Scandal be damned. Epilogue. 2 years later, the ranch had grown. With Killian in territorial prison and his lands auctioned, Margaret and Dakota had purchased adjacent property. They ran 300 head of cattle now, and Dakota's Apache family had established a small community on the far pasture, a middle ground between the reservation and the white world. Margaret sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert gold. In her arms, their daughter, Morning Star, named in both Apache and English, nursed contentedly. She had Dakota's dark hair and Margaret's green eyes, and she was the most beautiful thing Margaret had ever seen. Dakota rode up, his horse gleaming with sweat from a day's work. He dismounted and joined her on the porch, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Good day?" she asked. "Good day." His English was fluent now, though he kept his accent, kept his language, kept himself, even as he built this new life. "The new foals are strong. Your brother came by, wants to learn tracking. Did you teach him?" "Taught him respect first, tracking later." Margaret laughed. Her younger brother had arrived from St. Louis last month, running from his own troubles, and Dakota was slowly turning him into a decent man. "I love you," she said, not for the first time, but it felt important to say. Dakota kissed her temple, then his daughter's head. "I love you, both of you, all of this." He gestured at the ranch, the mountains, the life they'd built together. "The judge said you could have any man. You chose me. That choice saved my life, gave me everything." "You saved mine too," Margaret said. "You gave me partnership, equality, love, everything I thought I'd have to trade away to survive." Their daughter made a small sound. Dakota took her gently, cradling her against his chest, and began singing an Apache lullaby. Margaret watched her husband, her impossible, brave, beautiful husband, and felt gratitude wash over her. She'd looked at a shackled warrior and seen a man worth choosing. He'd looked at a desperate white woman and seen someone worth staying for. Together, they'd built something no one expected, something the law barely recognized, something more real than any paper marriage could ever be. They'd built home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Margaret and Dakota's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.